right, we are now live. Welcome to the show, everyone. Last week, President Trump gave a speech discussing the ways that the Chinese Communist Party have attempted and in some cases succeeded at undermining our elections. And actually, most of the mainstream media refused to even air the speech. Less than a week later, news broke that not only were non-citizen Chinese probably voting in our elections, but other illegals were registered to vote in New Jersey and did so. More comes out every day on all of this. We are going to spend most of today's show talking about fortification of our elections and all that relates to it. And for Unhinged, if you rooted for Spain, or is it Argentina, in the World Cup, you are a racist. I'm sorry, I do not make the rules. All of this on episode 546 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I am Linnea Lucan, your host, and as always, we also have Jim Likely, Vice President and Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute, and we also have Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute. Once again, Chris is not joining us today. He is busy on PTO, so everybody give him a round of applause for having time off. But before we get started here, if you want to support the show, you can go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate there. Please also click the thumbs up to like this video, and remember that sharing it also helps to break through some of YouTube's suppression. They still hate us. And every time we're about to talk about election integrity, and also the 2020 election. And so back in the day, that would get you demonetized and did get the Heartland Institute's YouTube channel demonetized. I'm not sure how much deeper of a hole they could throw us into, but we're going to find out. But even leaving just a comment helps us out too. If you're an audio listener, you can help us by leaving a nice review. Thank you guys. And please do so, all those things that you know how to do if you watch any YouTube channels or Rumble or whatever, because it really does help us out. Even more so than, just merely watching. So thank you guys so much. All right. Man, I guess we'll get right into it because technically we only have one real topic today that we're talking about, but it is so broad and so important that I have no doubt whatsoever that it is going to consume the entire show. But before we get to our main topic, we have Unhinged. Boy, do we have it. Alrighty. During a House Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee hearing, Representative Jasmine Crockett had some interesting remarks, as she is wont to do. If we can play that video.
The imaginations of the entire world when they saw all of these people of color that was playing for all these teams. And ultimately, if you recall, the last two teams, it was Argentina and Spain. And it seemed like the vast majority of the world was rooting for Argentina, or actually against Argentina, right? And why was that? Just give me an explanation if you could guess. If you'll just let them finish the answer.
Spain had the best team. Maybe that's why they were rooting for them.
There's also a racist history that exists.
Mr. Byer, you're recognized.
What to say about this one? So, one, as the audience probably already knows, I know nothing about soccer, and I know nothing about any of the teams that are playing soccer. So I was unaware that the entire world was in cahoots to root for Spain over Argentina, over any conflict. Forget a racial conflict of some kind. Actually, not really sure. From the clip alone, it's not super clear that she meant that it's bad that the world was rooting against Argentina, or good because that's the country that's racist. My first impression listening to this was that she was saying people disliked Argentina because they're racist against South Americans or something. Or is it because there are German expats there after World War II? And so we are rooting against Argentina because they're Nazis. I actually really don't know the context behind what she's talking about here, but it is absolutely insane. And I loved the professor's response there. He's like, maybe Spain is a good team. I don't know.
What I heard her say was, I have no idea what happened over there, but whatever it was, it's racist.
Well, it's actually really it's confusing. I really don't know who to root for on the pyramid of intersectional racism, because Spain colonized Argentina. They speak Spanish in Argentina. Guess why, everybody? It's because Spain came over and settled it in the New World. So that's bad. But I was actually rooting for Argentina, despite the fact that it didn't have any shots on goal, I think, through the entire regular time before they went to extra time. Although I don't know how they do the stats, because I thought I saw at least 5 shots on goal, but they didn't count them. So I don't know how soccer stats work. But I was pulling for Argentina. I didn't even notice that they had players of color. Literally, I don't look at the teams and think and pick out how many white guys, how many POCs, and all that. No, I was rooting for Argentina because, Lionel Messi is perhaps the greatest soccer player who has ever lived on the planet, and I wanted to see him win. And he only touches the ball. He only touched the ball, it seemed like, once every 20 minutes at best. But when he did, it was magic. I mean, the way he can just bend the ball and pass the ball and strike the ball is absolute poetry. If you love sports, I mean, one of the great things about sports is that you're watching people do things that you can't do. You can never do it. If you've ever been around a professional athlete, if you play, like I play, club tennis, I play in the USTA, and, I think I'm pretty good, and I am for my level and my age and all of that. But when you play a sport and then you see a real professional do it, it is so miles above what you think you would ever be, that is even humanly possible. People like that are absolute freaks of nature and talent. And but yeah, I was pulling for Argentina. Race had nothing to do with it. And what's sad, I mean, Jasmine Crockett is a complete clown. The way she speaks, the affectations, it's all an act. She went to she grew up rich, or at least very upper middle class. She went to private school. This is all an act, and she's a clown, and it's just, I am so, and the world, the United States especially, is so sick of race being in everything. If you can't even let people enjoy rooting for the team they want to win the World Cup without bringing race into it, you are the problem, and you are the racist.
I don't believe you.
Jim, I don't understand what you said, but I know it's racist.
It is kind of crazy, and I was kind of hoping that the professor who was being questioned there would have just looked at her deadpan and acted like he completely didn't understand the question and asked her to elaborate what racist history she's talking about. Because I am also curious, is she talking about the conquest of South America by Spain and Portugal and all sorts of other countries? Is she talking about like World War II history? Is she talking? I really have no idea. It's bizarre to think that there is some kind of racial animus component between Argentina and Spain, of all countries. I mean, nowadays, extremely, extremely strange. I don't know. It probably has something to do with colonization, but I don't know. We have a lot of people in the chat here who are asking important questions like, what is the World Cup? Which is my sentiment here. But I just thought that this clip was so bizarre and stupid. But the good news is that Jasmine Crockett will no longer be in office at the end of the year. She got beaten out in her primary by James Tallarico, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And so she will no longer be in office regardless of how the actual midterms go. So, because you can't for our foreign viewers, you cannot keep your seat and run for another position. So since she lost her Senate race, she will also no longer be able to be in the House. So hooray, I guess. I don't know. Okay, I just wanted to highlight that briefly. And it seemed also that various media outlets, even outlets that are friendly normally with Jasmine Crockett, were confused at exactly what point she was trying to make. So very funny to see. All right, so we are going to get into our very serious topic, though, today, starting off with the concept of non-citizens voting in our elections. I also am going to brush up on the China issue that Trump brought up during his talk last week, but I wanted to hit on this latest news about non-citizens voting in New Jersey first, among other places probably. You'll see. The Post-Millennial reports the DOJ investigates New Jersey over error, and that's in scare quotes, that registered 6,600 non-citizens to vote. The Department of Justice has opened an investigation into New Jersey's voting registration system after it was revealed by Governor Mickey Sherrill, who admitted that the motor voter program registered 6,600 non-citizens to vote, which led to 400 illegal votes being cast. Sherrill said that the incident did not impact election outcomes, but said in a post, "Last week I learned that a serious software error in New Jersey's motor vehicle system led to the registration of roughly 6,600 people who indicated that they were not U.S. citizens between June 2023 and June 2024, almost 3 weeks prior to my taking office. These individuals answered no when asked on a keypad whether they were a U.S. citizen when applying for driver's license and ID cards, but through no fault of their own, the system registered them anyway. This happened under the previous administration, and upon learning this information, I immediately ordered my chief counsel to launch an investigation to get to the bottom of what occurred. I also ordered the removal of any residents from our voter rolls who were erroneously added between June 2023 and June 2024. The new MVC administrator that I appointed has begun the process of replacing the vendor responsible for administering the system," she added. Senator Mike Lee, who has been staunchly pushing for the Save America Act in the Senate, said in a post in response to the non-citizens registering to vote, "Software doesn't register non-citizens to vote. People do. The fact that this happened, with or without software playing a role, can neither be ignored by Congress nor dismissed as a simple garden variety computer glitch." All right. So right off the bat here, yes, I can hear the annoying people saying, this is just a small number of people relative to the voting population, so it doesn't really matter. But every illegal vote makes your vote count less. 400 people who knew that they were illegal and shouldn't have been registered saw that they were registered and voted. 400 American votes then were countered or canceled out by opposing illegal votes, no matter what direction the vote happened in. So this is actual disenfranchisement of Americans, right, Jim? Every eligible American voter deserves to actually have their vote count.
Yeah, I mean, people need to, I've said this on this podcast, several times, that people need to take voter fraud seriously, and they need to consider every single, if there's one fraudulent vote, that takes away your franchise, your vote. You have to take it personally in that way. It doesn't matter that it was 400. I would bet dollars to donuts it's more than 400. I think it's more than 6,600 illegals on on the voter rolls in New Jersey. Mickey Sherrill herself said that the previous administration, Phil Murphy, another Democrat, knew about this and didn't reveal it. And so this was exposed. This was not a confession. This shouldn't be considered a confession by New Jersey that they're trying to do the right thing. This was concealed, and then it was exposed, and now we're just supposed to believe, oh yeah, don't worry about it. We're going to make sure we clean all this up. The SAFE Act and needs to be passed, of course, and we could talk about that a little bit more later. But an executive order issued by Trump demands information, voter information, so that it can be verified on citizenship records to make sure that each state, because we do let states run Each state runs their own elections. That's just fine. I'm very much a federalist in that regard. But there have to be basic safeguards and checking of those voter rolls. And you can do that with cooperation with the federal government. And Democrat state after Democrat state refuses to cooperate and refuses to clean up their rolls. I've seen clips of Scott Jennings on CNN just exasperated as it's always 1 on 5 or 1 on 6 or whatever. And he does fantastically well, so I hear, at least on these clips, because I don't have CNN. But he asks, well, hey, it was only 400 illegal votes, so that's 0.09% or something like that. So it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. So, if you live in New Jersey, your vote was just taken away. You take that personally. So your vote for governor was taken away by somebody who should not have been voting because they are not a citizen of this country. Only the citizens of the United States should be deciding the direction of this country, period. How is that even controversial? Yet Democrat state after Democrat state knows. They know this. They know they have thousands and thousands of illegals, people ineligible to vote, who should not be participating in our democracy because they are not citizens of this country. If you can't adhere to the basic notion that the people who are born here or are become naturalized citizens of the United States are the only ones who should have the franchise to decide its future, if you can't agree on that basic principle, then I don't know then go to another country. We can't have this in this country, and I don't care how small it is. It's not small. I guarantee you that it's a lot more than 6,600 and that there were a lot more than just 400 illegal votes cast in New Jersey.
Let me jump in. This is what intelligence agencies call a limited hangout. You know that you have, let's just say you've stolen an election, maybe some foreign country somewhere. And there's a whole lot of suspicion that you did it. There's a whole lot of evidence that's kind of brewing under the surface there. And so what you do is you say, we don't have anything to do with elections over there, and we certainly didn't try to do anything. But what did happen was there was this one agent who accidentally deleted the voting records of 6,600 people. And so you hang that out there. And the fact is that you did steal the election. You flat out just did a million different things, but you drop out that little thing. And then people can argue over that. Well, it's only 400 votes when you get down to it and blah, blah, blah. But what you're doing is you're trying to distract, trying to deflect people's attention to a minor issue that is only a small part of what you really did. And I imagine that's what's going on here, that Cheryl did this as a limited hangout. The idea was we'll throw a bone to the muckers out there and let them chew away at it for a little bit, and then they'll shut up and go away. But limited hangouts usually don't succeed in the long term. What happens is ultimately more and more information gets out, especially in this modern era where so much is done electronically. And as that information gets out, you look like more and more of a liar as the situation progresses. So that's what they're trying to do here. They're using the old tricks that intelligence agencies and other despicable semi-criminal or criminal organizations do. And this is just going to play out a little more slowly than we all would like, as it has done so far. It's been much slower than we would like, but it's going to play out. The prosecutions are coming, and I believe that this is going to be an issue where we're going to get a lot more information going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just one last thing. I mean, I'm just so sick of the gaslighting on this from Democrats and lefty talking heads. Because they've been telling us for years this isn't happening. There are no illegals voting. Okay, well now it's like we're at like stage 2. Or okay, there are illegals voting, but it's not a big deal. The next two steps come along as something like, you know what, it's actually a good thing that illegals are voting because they live here too. And then step 4 is going to be, why are you making such a big deal out of it? You're the real problem by talking about it. So, I think we're at stage 2 at this point right now. But it's just infuriating because, you either care about election integrity or you don't. And if you don't care about election integrity, you don't care about your country or your fellow countrymen. And you actually want to disenfranchise your fellow countrymen for your own what you consider your own political gain. I think somebody in the comments had mentioned, this would probably be a much bigger deal in New Jersey if it was 6,600 Republican voters. But apparently they are not Republican voters. So it's no big deal. There it is.
Yep.
Thanks,
yeah.
Ian.
No, they'd be demanding recounts and stuff.
Right. If you think about the context, though, in which these limited hangouts typically occur, much of it was in light of color revolutions that the United States sparked in countries across the globe. And it looks like this is part of an attempted color revolution in the United States. And let's have more information. Let's have more knowledge, and let those 6,600 grow to 16,000, and then 140,000, and then 2.2 million, and then 30 million. Let's find out what the real number really is, and then let's just deal with it. Let's do the right thing. And one thing we could do is there's a legislation before Congress right now. It's in the Senate that would clean up our elections very admirably. Why is there no action on that?
Yeah, and this all goes back to and Sam remembers this, the motor voter law, which goes back to the Clinton administration. And it was a bad idea then, and it's a bad idea now, because even at the time there's no checking. You don't have to be a citizen of the United States to get a driver's license, and you can just check the box that says, would you like to also register to vote? Sure. And there's no checking on that. The whole system is designed to bring people who shouldn't be voting into our election systems. And I just saw on Twitter today that part of the motor voter law back in, I think, 1993 was that there was supposed to be regular purging of the voter rolls to make sure that only American citizens who are registered to vote are actually voting. And those checks and balances on that went out the window, as anybody who had a brain in 1993 knew would happen. It's a system. We're going to get in big trouble, and we're going to talk about our election integrity. That's the theme of the show today. It seems like the election system in the United States is designed for fraud. Or another way to put it is, if you were trying to design an election system in which fraud could be maximized, how would it look much different than what we have right now? It wouldn't look much different than what we have right now. It would be almost exactly what we have right now.
Well, that's absolutely right. And in fact, the supporters of the motor voter bill knew that it wouldn't be, that the taking people off the rolls wouldn't be enforced. They knew that. They were counting on it. I mean, why on earth would they even care to have that bill if everybody's going to be taken off the rolls? It would be just an exercise in futility. So this is really an absurd situation, and we've got to get on top of it. And it's good to see some attention going to it, because remember, this is all happening only 6 years after the most secure election in American history.
Yeah.
So
attaboy, Sam, trying to get us remonetized.
You serious?
Thank you, J. Jonah Jameson. All right. Mark over on Facebook says 36 state laws request or require voters to show some form of identification at the polls. 14 states and Washington, D.C. do not require any documentation to vote at the polls. Yeah, that's true. And we have a good question here that I'm going to pitch to Sam from Chris, who says, why are states allowed to decide their own voting systems for a nationwide election? Surely a common system should be imposed on all the states, right?
Well, you can do that if you get an amendment to the Constitution, because the Constitution gives the authority to regulate elections pretty much to the state legislatures. Now, interestingly enough, it doesn't give it to the courts, and it doesn't give it to the governors or to state executive branch agencies, which is what happened in the 2020 elections. So if we had stuck with just what the Constitution says, most of what happened in 2020, probably 80 to 90% of it, although it's hard to know at this point how much happened, but most of it, and the great majority, would not have happened because it would simply have been blatantly illegal. People would have been aware that the state legislatures hadn't done this because it would be obvious somebody else did it. So that is the issue here. But there's a little hook here, because the federal government has authority over federal elections. So although the elections take place on the state level, the federal government can regulate the federal part of it. And since the elections are typically joined, they're done at the same time and on the same ballot and so forth, the federal government can have a lot of influence over it. And that's where the Save America Act comes in. It's under the authority that the federal government does have. And one of the excellent things that the Trump administration has done, frankly, I have to praise this, is getting the post office to refuse to mail ballots that are not clearly legal, meaning that they have said that the state must send them a list of every person that's eligible for a mail-in ballot, and then the post office will only send to those people who are on that list. Of course, in many states, everybody's eligible for a mail-in ballot, but that's an issue that will have to be resolved. But this is a good idea, and it's one of the many things that the federal government can do to oversee elections. So the states are allowed to decide their own voting systems, but that's a limited thing. It's the date that you can vote on, although there's also a national election day. You could vote on state things at other times. So there are things like, it's the time and place and manner of elections, okay? The manner of an election would be one of the issues. There would be how many mail-in ballots you can have, and so on and so forth. But if you're going to use mail-in ballots and the federal government has jurisdiction over the mails, then you are going to have to do whatever the federal government says if you're going to get your ballots through the mail. You can go and hand them out door to door if you like, but that runs into a bit of money. And of course, it's so blatantly corrupt that people, even in California, might find that a little suspicious. So it's like everything in America. It's a combined system. It's complicated. It's a little bit crazy, but when people are honest and decent, it works. What we need to do is make sure that there are honest and decent people in government so that these things will be regulated properly and that there will be prosecutions or investigations and prosecutions when people break the law and do the wrong things and manipulate elections. We're a long ways away from that, unfortunately. Remember that one of America's founders, John Adams, said that our system of government is fit only for a moral people. We have to be virtuous in order to deserve this form of government. We seem to be far away from that now, but the only way we're going to get back is there's one of two ways. There's either going to be steps, like the Trump administration is trying to do, or a collapse and or revolution. I vote for the former. Let's and I'm not telling anyone how to vote in an election, but let's say I'm casting my personal vote for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's thank you for that, Sam, because the question was asked by one of our foreign viewers, but I think it's important to remind Americans too about this kind of thing, especially as we have major parties being taken over by sub-parties like the DSA who are advocating for things like abolition of the Senate and direct democracy and all sorts of terrifying nonsense. So
President selected by Congress.
President appointed by the House of
Yeah.
Representatives.
Yeah, exactly. And a deletion of the Electoral College, all sorts of great stuff. So,
Supreme Court works for the Congress too, or works for the House in their plan.
So we mentioned California a little bit ago, and here there is an interesting tidbit over at Red State about that. So they write that far from a simple software error on their end, the firm that actually was involved in, or like that runs that particular software that the DMV was using, the firm essentially argued that state officials are the ones who dropped the ball by failing to check the citizenship status of thousands of applicants who had already identified themselves as non-citizens. Cheryl says that the state will be phasing out the use of that software. But the controversy is seeping into California, where the same vendor has a major contract with the state's Department of Motor Vehicles. California announced a partnership with Endemia in 2022 to modernize its DMV operations, including issuing all driver's licenses and identification cards starting in late 2025. The contract was for 12 years, while a press release from the company indicated that they had been providing physical ID cards and technology to the state for more than 64 years. So the current CEO announced at the time that the partnership was not just about aesthetics, but about raising the bar on security and trust, which I'm sure he did not use an LLM to write his announcements. While no identical software error has been confirmed, the New Jersey scandal has prompted fresh questions about whether California's system could have similar vulnerabilities in its automatic voter registration process, especially as the Trump administration and Department of Homeland Security have flagged tens of thousands of potential non-citizen registrations in California and demanded greater scrutiny of its voter rolls. I mean, something like this, though, would the Save America Act even fix this? I think yesterday the Save America Act was passed in the House as an attachment or like a rider to a spending bill, of course, as they are wont to do. But it still needs to pass the Senate, and I'm extremely skeptical that that's going to happen, unfortunately. I'd love to see it happen, but I don't know. But what else could we do?
Well,
revolution.
Well, let's.
I give up.
Well, hang on.
Let's try a few things short of that, Sam. I mean, there might be a couple ideas that's worth a try. I don't know. Look, I mean, as you were talking there, Sam, and from the question of states running the elections and what influence can the federal government have on that? I mean, clearly here, because the SAVE Act is in peril and sadly less likely it's less likely to get passed than it is likely to be passed. I think that's safe to say. But still, the Trump administration is trying to do what it can with the tools that it does have as the executive in order to at least nudge the states to clean their voter rolls of people that are dead, to try to secure the election as much as possible before November. And that's admirable. But I remembered as you were talking, Sam, a lot of people listening to this podcast, and certainly you do, remember the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. That was a federal policy that was enforced because the federal government said, oh, well, sure, you can set your speed limit to 75 or 80 if you like, but then you will not get any federal money to fix your roads. So it's your choice. Go ahead and make it. And so every state decided, well, okay, 55 is fine. We want to make sure that we get federal money to fix the interstates. And the Trump administration is actually doing this. We're not here to talk about, Medicaid or other welfare reforms in the states. But I think it was just this week, RFK Jr. decided to withhold all Medicaid funding Medicaid funding to California until they fix the complete corrupt mess that it is, or at least make some effort. And they're not making any effort. Again, these systems are designed to maximize fraud. This is exactly how you would design it if you wanted to make sure people were stealing money from our welfare system and also corrupting our elections with illegal votes. So the Trump administration is trying, and it can probably pull a few more levers, especially money. Governors listen to money. or they should say, or I should say, they pay attention when the money spigot is turned off from Washington, D.C. And so the Trump administration, I would imagine, is going to continue to leverage what power they have over the distribution of funds to the states to make sure that they have to at least make some good faith efforts to clean their voter rolls, because you could even get a blue state governor to mouth the right words, but nothing is actually done. And so that's what's happening now. It needs to be ramped up, but we really need to pass the SAVE Act.
Most of these programs, let's talk about the entitlement programs just for a minute, because I just wrote an op-ed about this. I don't know where it'll go, but it's interesting because those programs were put together in the first place in that way in order to make the states do exactly what the federal government wanted to do. They'd say, okay, we want you to spend all this money, and you only have to put up 10% of it, 20% of it, whatever amount, and we'll put up the rest. And the idea was that then the states will do what they want them to do. But authority has just absolutely crashed during this century. And the states have been increasingly pushing back against the federal government in two ways. One, and it, to me, it really starts becoming really evident with the marijuana issue. It's illegal on the federal level, and that means it's illegal. Federal law, overrides. No, God! But instead, what has happened is the states simply went ahead and legalized it. Many states have done that. And the federal government has said, well, oh, gee, nothing we can do, I guess, which is very interesting. That undermined the federal supremacy, which is a constitutional provision and principle that federal laws override state laws if they are constitutionally sound laws. And so the federal government has now got this problem where they send all this money to the states, or is it a problem? We'll discuss that. They send all this money to the states and say, here are the quid pro quos here. Here are the requirements that you have to follow in order to get that money. And then the states just do whatever they want to do. And the federal government says, one thing you have to make sure, and this will be passed by Democrat Congresses and signed by Democrat presidents. So it's not a partisan thing. We'll say what you have to do is make sure that everybody on your Medicaid rolls, for example, really belongs there. And here's how we want you to do that. And then they just don't do it. And the federal government just sort of looks the other way and goes, and the Medicaid rolls blossom in a beautiful way if you're a big government hack. And so this undermining of the federal government's control over these programs has put them in a position where we're basically sending other states' taxpayers' money to states that are, let's say, more unscrupulous or less scrupulous, let's say, than other states. So if your state is a scrupulous state, maybe it's a place like South Carolina or Indiana, Nebraska. It's scrupulous. They really try hard not to waste money and so forth. Your money went to the federal government, and it went to Minnesota and California and other states where it's corrupt. And so you got ripped off anyway. And now the big complaint is that, well, now if you punish these states, then the people who get punished are going to be the people who are already suffering. And taxpayers, I would say taxpayers who didn't even vote for those politicians that put this stuff in place. Well, you know what? Too bad. We didn't vote for any of it. If you live in one of those states that doesn't have those kinds of problems, although probably almost all of them do, if not all. But the problems are a matter of extent and level. What we see in California, the numbers, what we see in Minnesota, the numbers are terrifyingly bad. And so this is an important matter. And the same thing is happening with elections, to bring it right back to the actual subject. But it's but it is what's happening with elections. But it's happening across the board. Is the point that we've lost our sense of authority. We've lost our respect for authority. A big reason we've lost our respect for authority is because the authorities of this country have not deserved it. They have let us down repeatedly, time after time, and people are sick of it. So they now stand idly by while their states fall into corruption. But it doesn't get better that way. It only gets worse. And so this is a huge problem, and it's only going to be repaired by reassertion of federal supremacy in elections, in the areas that the federal government has authority over, and the use of the club, which is that you don't get this money if you don't prove to us, to our satisfaction, not your satisfaction, to the federal government's satisfaction, that you are on the level. So that's how this works. And that's why it's relevant to look at the Medicaid fraud and all the other fraud that's going on in this country, where nationally financed programs are being corrupted by the states. So this is the way forward. There is a way forward, and it's good to see some action on it. It's good to see people finally admitting that no, things aren't perfect. This isn't the best possible system, and if it's working as designed, then we should be tarring and feathering the designers and worse.
Absolutely. So in the past, Heartland, we talked about this on previous episodes of In the Tank, but we've done polling that found that 1 in 5 mail-in voters admit to committing at least one kind of voter fraud. So, those are, and they tend to be kind of minor fraud occurrences. It tends to be, but it's still fraud. But my point is,
wait, there's more.
Thanks, Andy. They tend to be minor fraud occurrences. There's something like, someone filling in a ballot for their mom that they're the live-in caretaker for, stuff like that. According to our policy study, though, that we published, which was Who Really Won the 2020 Election, which viewers can find at heartland.org, those minor occurrences, when they were stacked up together, were enough probably to change the outcome of the 2020 election in several important swing states, even without the kind of more conspiratorial fraud at a mass scale. Just the kind of mundane, boring stuff was enough to swing an election. And you realistically, you probably can't stop someone from filling in a ballot for their significant other or something, so long as mail-in voting exists. You don't want a situation where the government can stop someone from filling out someone else's ballot inside of their own house. You don't want like indoor flock camera surveillance to make sure that we can maintain mail-in voting. So it seems to me that mail-in voting is the thing that has to go. In that policy paper, Heartland listed proactive policies and also preventative policies. One of the proactive policies that was highlighted was states should minimize mail-in voting by requiring a valid excuse, which is how it used to be done. They didn't used to just mail it to everybody. So it really doesn't seem like, you're disenfranchising anyone by doing that. We also said states should update and verify election registration rolls annually. They should require identification to vote in person, encourage in-person voting, require a witness or a notary for mail-in ballots. And I think that's a pretty good one that I haven't really seen too many other organizations talk about. So I think that's somewhat novel for the Heartland Institute. And then in terms of preventatives, outlawing ballot harvesting, which I think pretty much everyone would be on board with if Republicans were doing a lot of ballot harvesting. States should forbid unattended and unsecure election drop boxes. So no more drop boxes. Require signature verification for mail-in voting, like when you drop it off at the post office. States should establish agencies to investigate claims of election law violations. and states or the federal government should pass laws that impose harsh penalties for those who do get caught committing voter fraud. I think all of these are
may I
really
jump in?
simple. Yeah, Sam, I read these and I think these should be things that we can agree to at a bipartisan level. And it's extremely suspicious that you cannot get Democrats to agree to this stuff, even though this is how things were even just a few years ago.
Absolutely right. I think that one of the provisions in Trump's executive order on this holds that the post office will have a trackable ID on each ballot that it goes through the mails. And so they can tell where it's been at every point. And to me, that is a real game changer and an incredibly smart and totally justified use of technology to ensure that that fraud is reduced. I personally would love to see much more use of paper ballots and much less of purely electronic voting. I think the latter is even more, let's say much more subject to possible cheating than paper ballots. And paper ballots are subject to cheating as well, but they're certainly way better than that. And also, we do need to count the votes day of. This whole business of counting votes for 2 weeks after, and then they skew toward a particular candidate and away from the other is it's not good for the acceptance of authority in a country, and you're leading your way toward a real potential problem, something very like revolution.
Yeah, and Mark here from Facebook says, how would the mail-in voting policies affect deployed or based outside of the continental U.S.? The same way they always were, which is that, you have bases and stuff that can hold elections or go to your embassy or something. There's no reason that you should be able to just randomly send in a ballot from any location.
Think about this. The whole notion that, well, I happen to be abroad, so where's my ballot? It's like, you're abroad. How important is what's going on in America to you? You're coming back, we don't know. You're real, you exist, we don't know. So all of that seems to me, it's like if you commit a felony, for example, you take yourself out of voting, all right? So that's just the way it works. If you go abroad, maybe your state has decided that takes you away from voting. I don't have a problem with that. Certainly for the military and diplomats and so forth that are posted abroad by the country, you would want them to be able to vote. And as a person who is in another country voluntarily, and they want to vote in the United States, I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to offer. But to take that and then say, but if you're don't feel like going to the voting booth, you're living in the United States, you don't feel like going to the voting booth, or you want to vote early for some weird reason, then you should be able to do that. So we'll mail a ballot to you. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we have to start honoring differences. We have to start honoring, let's have a little diversity out here, We have to start honoring the distinctions between things. That a person who wants to vote because they're in a foreign country for a good reason, that's fine. I see no reason they shouldn't be allowed to vote. But a person who says, I want a mail ballot because if I were in Estonia, I would need a mail ballot. No, you're not in Estonia. You're 4 blocks from your polling place. Walk over there. Or if you can't walk over there, then show medical reason that you can't get over there, and then you can get a mail-in ballot, which will be tracked by the federal government because they have authority over the Postal Service. Okay. So there are ways of dealing with this problem. And I think that what we're seeing now is the first steps towards solving these problems. And we all want to see a lot more and a lot faster. But let's get done what we can get done. And I think number one is it the defense bill that the SAVE Act is now attached to?
I thought it was I guess it might be a spending defense bill.
That's right. That's what I thought.
Because I had read that it was a spending bill, but I had not read it was a defense bill. But I believe that it is a spending bill for Department of War. Right.
So $1.5 trillion. I guess that does have some effect on the budget. So that would count.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys, when the wrong person gets into office, obviously it can be catastrophic for the country over time. We've seen very troubling trends from the Democrat Party, especially the creeping influence of like actual communists, not just wishy-washy, semi-progressive liberals, communists who believe in not just open borders, but also things like the confiscation of actual property and wealth from people. It's easy to steal the digital money from your banking account. It's harder to confiscate physical assets like gold and other precious metals. So that's why we believe at In the Tank that precious metals are a good investment, but you want to be careful about who you buy them from. We trust Advisor Metals over all of the other guys, and that's because we know the person running the place is the best of the best. A great friend of Liberty, Ira Vershatsky, owns and is the managing member of Advisor Metals. He has decades of experience in precious metals and is the only person in the physical metals industry who has the Commodities Futures Trading Commission federal registration. What that means for you is that everything Ira or a member of his team says to you has to be completely factual. So there's no bait and switch. He is held to the highest of ethical standards, and there's full transparency, which is lacking in other places nowadays, even our voting system. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio and your savings, if you're planning for retirement and are concerned about economic uncertainty, if you want a tangible asset that is easy to buy and sell, you can secure your assets with a wide range of physical precious metals by getting in touch with our friend Ira at Advisor Metals. Ira is going to make it super easy for you. So please visit climaterealismshow.com/metals, and you can leave your information for Ira and get started with investing in precious metals and expand your current portfolio. We've had people who are viewers of this show who have done this. So you are not alone, and it is confirmed that this is a great business. So please go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. And when you talk to Ira, make sure you let him know who sent you. That helps us as you're helping your financial future by diversifying with precious metals at Advisor Metals. Thank you very much to Advisor Metals, and thank you to our audience for buying from them. It helps us while it's helping you. It's terrific service all around. And thank you to our audience for a very flattering comments about my segue. Anyway, what is China up to? The speech that Trump gave last week, which almost no one in the mainstream media covered except to try to pre-bunk it, so to speak, before they even saw the evidence, revealed China's role in undermining our elections. Red State reports newly available declassified documents and recent statements from President Trump are shining a light on the Chinese Communist Party's theft of personal data belonging to a staggering 220 million American voters. According to investigative journalist Catherine Herridge, the massive haul, which can be combined with other hacked records such as the 2015 security clearance applications and health data, creates serious risks for voter registration fraud, identity theft, and espionage recruitment. Newly declassified documents show that over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preference, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote and engage in other nefarious activities. This data loss presents an unprecedented election security nightmare. The intelligence even shows that China assigned a data exploitation unit specifically to this project. I think we have a video of Trump discussing this.
They show that over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote and engage in other nefarious activities, which is exactly what was happening. This data loss presents an unprecedented election security nightmare. The intelligence even shows that China assigned a data exploitation unit specifically to this new project. But it gets even worse. Raw intelligence obtained by the FBI in 2020, yet buried by rogue bureaucrats, stated that China's activities even included an attempt to manufacture illegal ballots for Joe Biden. Documents show that during this period, dozens of significant CIA and NSA reports about China's election targeting were kept out of the presidential briefing. These were briefings I would get almost every day. Everything was kept out that was of importance. One email among intelligence analysts admitted that they had, quote, deliberately massaged the presidential daily briefing to withhold information regarding Chinese activities related to the election. Another official inside the FBI wrote that she was running, quote, a shadow government, unquote, to keep intelligence about China's election meddling from becoming known and to keep it away from the honorable press. Other officials who witnessed such efforts perceived the motivations to be blatantly political.
I can't believe he called the press honorable. Anyway, worst thing Trump has ever said. Okay, so yeah, one of the released documents from the FBI was an intelligence information report, so not verified, so take this with a grain of salt, saying that the CCP used TikTok to traffic in American identity data and then used it to create fake driver's licenses attached to real identification numbers and addresses of citizens that Chinese immigrants, both legal and student non-citizens, then used to vote for Biden. How many? Tens of thousands, allegedly. That's pretty significant claim. The FBI said that one of the problems for this particular claim inside of the same document, the formatting the FBI uses for like tips documents is they give a summary of the tip, they give the tip in detail, and then at the end they give like what their follow-up was. And in the follow-up for this one, they say, well, you don't have to give an address to make a TikTok account. So it seems unlikely that they were getting the addresses from TikTok. But TikTok does collect and store location data. And in 2023, which wouldn't have impacted the 2020 election, but still is notable, TikTok launched TikTok Shop, which you can buy things off of and have them delivered to your house. So obviously it does take your address. I don't know when that particular document came out. I'm guessing before the TikTok Shop thing, but who knows? Anyway, like all big information dumps, you really need to read the boring parts of the documents in order to understand what you're reading. The source and the subject, context lines, whether or not the tip was verified or not, all of that will be in there. And it'll give you a better idea of how much stock you should place in particular claims. Sadly, no one in the media on the left or the right seems to know how to do this anymore. But anyway, the big story, though, is that all of this was kept secret from Trump leading up to the 2020 election. They knew that this was going on in the months leading up to November. They knew that there were vulnerabilities and they covered it up. And we have all these emails of them discussing how they covered it up, and even emails and Skype messages and stuff from FBI agents and CIA agents saying, hey, it's weird that we're trying to downplay this. Doesn't it seem kind of partisan? and getting shut down by their bosses on it, and saying that they're afraid to speak up during like meetings and whatnot about these issues because they were afraid that they would get fired or penalized in some way for being against what the general, I guess, deep state wanted. So now the media is trying to continue that work by covering stuff up. But the Epic Times looked at all of this. They also quoted the FBI agent Nikki Flores talking about how she's basically running a shadow government. And that was with regards to disagreements between different analysts and agencies about how to frame these reports related to the CCP. Epoch writes, a longtime intelligence analyst for the FBI, Flores served as the agency's election security lead for the 2020 elections. She was also managing all intelligence and strategic functions for the FBI's counterintelligence program. In 2022, she was appointed analyst in charge of the intelligence division of the Washington Field Office, the first person to hold the position. And while some analysts in the intelligence committee were fighting to include language about China influencing U.S. elections, Flores consistently argued against it. She pushed for a narrative that there was no evidence of the intention of what they were doing with all of their meddling. She says that we note there was an awareness of this potential effect, she wrote in an email at the time. More than 20 pages show the debates between various intelligence agencies about how to communicate the reports that the CCP was attempting to influence our elections. One email sent November 19th, 2020 from an unnamed strategic intelligence analyst includes references to altering messaging to Trump specifically, who was serving out the last days of his first term in office. He said, "We have deliberately massaged our one pending daily briefing to the president to avoid any direct links to the election." A subsequent email from an unnamed official at the Office of Director of National Intelligence challenged the changes to information presented to the president. He said, "I would be concerned as to why they're deliberately massaging analysis away from elections," the official wrote. Another analyst brought the attention to other colleagues and said, "This is a really good example, but far from the only one of what I've been raising since the summer, that the intelligence community is deliberately avoiding mentioning a connection to elections for non-substantive reasons, and that China has been caught conducting election influence." You guys really need to go read the Epoch Times whole summary of this. They do a good job. It is... I'm not going to say it's crazy because this is kind of par for the course at this point. We all know that there were multiple segments of the FBI and CIA who were explicitly undermining Trump's presidency the first time around. I'm hoping that they have a better handle on that stuff this time, but who knows? Right, Jim? How do we feel about the FBI conspiring to change the language for the president's daily briefings to keep him out of the loop on intelligence with regards to the CCP?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Yes. Well, I guess I don't have to rant now that we had that drop in there. But no, this is part of a pattern, as people could see. Let me, and the way the media has been covering this, the legacy media has been covering this, has been infuriating. But let me take you back to when in 2020 there was the Hillary Clinton campaign allowed two lefty journalists to be embedded in their campaign so they could write a campaign book, which they expected to be the inside story of America's first female president. And instead, well, that's not the book they could write because that's not what happened. But they had wrote that on election night, Hillary Clinton was so inconsolable that they just basically had to cancel the night, and that they would convene together the next morning. And she walked into the meeting. This is in the book. She walked into the meeting with John Podesta and the rest of the staff, and she said that we're going to pin this on Russia. And they'd already, of course, had false Oppo research from Christopher Steele in their pocket that they paid for, and so they said, we're just going to blame this on Russia. I didn't lose. Russia stole the election for Donald Trump. President Obama and his intelligence apparatus then they conducted a sham investigation on a pretext that they knew was false to try to destroy Donald Trump's presidency before it even got started. And the entire Russia thing was fake. There was nothing there. There was no collusion. There was no interference in our election of any significance other than maybe some Facebook ads. The idea that a foreign entity doesn't want to try to influence an American election, of course they do. But how widespread is it? And is there actually criminal activity going on? That didn't happen there. The whole Mueller report, what did he spend? 18 months investigating this, drawing it out. MSNBC couldn't wait. It was going to be their political Christmas when the Mueller report came out. And even with a rigged investigation, the report said there's nothing here. But here we have China and we have real evidence. And the intelligence, deep state, hangers-on from the Obama administration, all these leftover career people refuse to reveal the real evidence, actual evidence of China's actual infiltration of our election system, including the gathering of the voter information of millions and millions and millions of Americans. That's real. They had the evidence. They had the goods on them. And as you were reading all that set up there, Linnea, from the Epoch Times, and I definitely recommend all of our listeners and viewers go over and check that out. It made me remember Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, those two star-crossed FBI lovers, exchanging texts about the horror that Donald Trump might win the 2020 election. And I think it was Peter Strzok who said, "Don't worry about it. We won't let him win. We won't let that happen." Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are not outliers. Just like in our first segment today, we found 6,600 illegals registered to vote in New Jersey. But that's certainly that's not all, that's all there is. That's not all there is. And people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are not outliers in the deep state. These career bureaucrats who think they are the only people who are legitimate enough to actually run the country and implement policy. You read there, Linnea, that these people are worried about being fired. How about being worried about being arrested for crimes? In a conspiracy of silence and inaction and deception against the president of the United States. How about that? That should be something you should be worrying about today, not about getting fired. This is an enormous scandal. I mean, the act itself of China trying to infiltrate our election systems, our real systems, and gather this information so that it can be used in espionage. We have another clip there where the great Catherine Herridge explains how this is really an espionage story as much as anything else.
Yeah.
But the deep state withholding this information, why did they do that? They did that because they didn't want to arm Trump with the truth, with ammunition that showed that this is not going to be the most secure election in American history. And one reason for that is that China is infiltrating our entire system across the country before November gets here. It is criminal that they withheld this and massaged the presidential daily briefing. That's not massaging the presidential daily briefing. That is withholding information and thus giving false information, a false picture of the world to the president of the United States. That is a very serious offense. And so, I think maybe your pension could be in danger here. And maybe could your freedom.
I know. It's our government, just because of everyone, it seems to me, is way too worried about the optics of arresting people who are undermining the presidency for political reasons. To them, it seems like, it feels, and I understand it, it feels icky to throw someone in jail who is opposing you, and it's mostly politically driven. But this is serious. This is the fate of the entire country. This isn't just the FBI agents doing this are doing this for probably multiple reasons. Some of them are doing it because they have pathological terminal TDS. Some of them are doing it because they're just, party guys who are, this is what I watched on CNN today. So this is, what I'm going to promote in my work. Others are possibly up to something a bit deeper, a bit more nefarious when it comes to undermining the United States in general, might be their goal, because they have true anti-American sentiment. They truly think that China is worthy of, letting it slide. and like supporting the Chinese Communist Party. So there are a whole bunch of different reasons why people within our intelligence agencies would do this. We have to get over the feeling that it's icky to arrest people for this kind of thing. Like you said, Jim, these guys should not be just thrown, taking their pensions away, firing them from their cushy, whatever, analyst jobs. They should be in jail for deliberately withholding, intelligence from the president during his daily briefings. It should be unacceptable. But everyone says, I can see it already, what the media's response to that kind of a thing would be if these people were dragged before a court, would be like, oh, this is totalitarianism or something. But you cannot. It is a different kind of totalitarianism to just let people break the law all left and right and not have any penalty for it.
Well, the thing is, though, that if you can keep it secret, then it can happen and there's no problem. It's when it starts to get out that you have a concern. And I think that one interesting thing here is that the state has to retain its credibility. And in order for the state to retain its credibility, they can only hang out bad things so far. And only to a certain size, because when you get beyond that, then people start to lose their respect for you, and they start smoking marijuana and building dams in their property and so forth.
No, God!
We have but that's the problem you have when you're trying to build an oppressive state. Either you go out there and you just kill a lot of people and say, you're next, so shut up. And everybody shuts up because they don't want to be next, understandably. Or you try to do it through the manipulation and through the Bernays method. Was it Edward Bernays, Bernays, who invented the art of public relations. And he started it as in advertising for commercial ventures. He created the Torches of Freedom advertisement to get women to smoke cigarettes. So that was a biggie. Torches of Freedom, and then of course those techniques. Government employs those techniques now. Just that's what they do. The thing is, though, you can only, as I say, you can only let a certain amount of information get out. So what they used to have to do was somebody who was going a little too far, hanging out a little too far, well, they'd kill them. And that would silence them. And I'm sure they still have been doing that. Well, I was around during the years of the Clinton administration. And remember all those suspicious deaths that just says, oddly, this person was holding on to a particularly interesting information that could be embarrassing to the state. And suddenly they committed suicide, just inexplicably, or they fell off a mountain or something. So this is all a really tricky kind of a situation where you can only go so far, and if it gets too far, you have to make that jump to, as I say, silencing people big time, permanently. And so that was what they were confronted with Trump. When he was running in 2016, I think they were worried about him, but they thought, well, there's no way on earth this guy is ever going to become president. So we just need to embarrass him enough to keep him from being president. They miscalculated, and what they miscalculated was how repugnant a candidate Hillary Clinton was to so many people. They don't hang around with normal people very much, and so they didn't realize how bad she looked, and that she was actually beatable. So
You
You fellas been doing a bit of boozing, have you? Sucking back on Grandpa's old cough medicine?
Exactly. That's what happened. So they didn't really, they were truly shocked by Trump's election. And so then they immediately had to pivot from getting Trump, from preventing Trump's election to preventing Trump from being able to do anything, at which they were much, much more successful. And then in 2020, Trump lost, but then he spent 4 years, plotting with very clever people about what they're going to do when they come back. And those messages within the FBI, it's just appalling, just absolutely appalling. Reading what these people are saying, to me, it's worse than the Strzok business, which was bad enough.
Yeah. But
this is even worse. This is we're going to do everything we can to destroy any kind of opposition to the state. And so that tells you, though, how vulnerable they are. That I think they've long recognized that there's this gap between what you can get away with the limited hangouts and so forth and the manipulation, and what you may need in terms of keeping secrets. And that gap right there is where people disappear.
Yeah.
People who have access to those secrets disappear. So I would say that the FBI person was probably saving lives by doing that, but she's risking many more down the road. So it was a very terrible situation. And it is really, really great that this is getting out. There's plenty more, I'm sure. And we need sunlight on this. We really do. We need to disinfect this because it is a horrible, horrible infection that kills.
Absolutely. And again, it's undermining the legitimate authority by rightfully making people not trusted anymore. And actually, that is something that happened also 250 years ago with a state level government. So I am going to transition us into our America at 250 or USA at 250. I still don't know what the segment is called. Segment here to close us out. This week in 1776 continues much of the same as the last couple of weeks. More ships are appearing off of the coast of New York. It seems that the entire British Navy has showed up. You can imagine the horizon just speckled with white sheets from tall ships. They're moving up the rivers too, and they're landing ground troops to try to surround the city. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, the very first state constitution is being drafted, and it's almost complete. And this one that's being drafted right now will be the state constitution until 1790, when they look at what it wrought and decide to throw it away because it was kind of garbage. And so the very first version of it is a look at what our federal government might have looked like if we had followed this example too closely, and if we leaned a little bit too hard towards popular democracy and the kind of like hyper enlightenment democratic principles, which it turned out are not so great. So it was influenced very heavily by the ideas of Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin, who continued to defend it even after it started falling apart. So there's that. It had several unique features. One, it had a unicameral legislature, like Nebraska has now, but a lot bit worse. So that means that it had a single house. Our government has, to the people who aren't familiar with these terms, our government has what's called a bicameral legislature. So we have the House and the Senate, bicameral. The idea was, though, for the Pennsylvania Constitution, that no one should be able to overrule elected representatives. Franklin really liked this, as I said, and you'll see why we should all be thankful that some of his more conservative colleagues ended up getting a bit of moderation on that for our federal government. Instead of having a governor, Pennsylvania established a Supreme Executive Council, so a committee, yay. And the president of that council had basically no real authority. It also had the widest voter pool of all. What's happening? It also had the widest voter pool of any other state's election system. It granted suffrage to any free man 21 or older with 1 year of residence and paid taxes. At the time, this was very radical. Obviously, today that sounds restrictive compared to what we have now. But then it was very radical. Other states at least demanded some kind of property ownership. Representatives also only served for 1 year. Which, can we turn off the music, please? Sorry, I can't hear myself think over it. Representatives only served for 1 year, which might sound good to those of us who get frustrated with our representatives and think like, this person has been in the Senate for decades. When are they leaving? But it actually bore out a lot of instability. They were also unpaid, which again sounds really good to me when I'm mad at our own feckless and greedy legislators. But think about it a little bit more why that might not be the best idea. They also had a council of censors, which every 7 years was supposed to act as a sort of combination of a Supreme Court and Continental Congress or Constitutional Congress. And they would look at whether or not the Constitution was being violated in some way and what changes need to be made to that Constitution. So every 7 years they were rewriting everything, or that was the plan anyway. And they thought that would eliminate the threat of like totalitarian government. And that council was also elected with direct popular vote, as were the judiciary. John Adams, who Sam referenced earlier in the show, famously hated it. His quote is great on it. He called it so democratical that it must produce confusion and every evil work. He thought it was volatile and prone to swinging wildly with the whims of the voters. And it did. It turns out, for one, that having unpaid representatives, while that sounds good to us when we're angry at them, meant that only the people who could afford to not have a real job could hold office. So people who needed to work for a living couldn't take a year off to serve and to do it. The 1776 Constitution was basically all power to the legislature. So imagine there's no Senate, just the House, just Congress. And they have all of the power with no checks and balances. Even the judiciary was subject to their whims, and there was no counterbalance to that. Judges could be removed at a whim for alleged misbehavior, which was determined by the legislature. Multiple justices were removed for ruling in ways that were just unpopular or for questioning the fiscal policy of the legislature. There were no checks. That ended up happening. Or what ended up happening was they just issued endless currency to pay for the things that were popular in their districts, including war financing, paying off state debt. Soldiers were paid in currency then during those years that they were like spending like crazy. That was worth basically nothing because they just printed tons and tons of currency. They were impotent to act quickly when conditions demanded. For example, in 1763, there was a mutiny that was marching on Philadelphia because soldiers weren't being paid. And the Supreme Executive Council couldn't address the mutineers' demands because they weren't allowed to do anything without the full assembly being there. And the full assembly couldn't be there because there were mutineers gathering outside of the State House. So they couldn't defend themselves. And the Continental Congress had to flee and leave the town because it couldn't get defense approval as a mob is literally descending on them. Ironically, the most democratic constitution in the country actually ended up being the most unstable and the most impotent and the most tyrannical because short-term thinking dominated all of their decisions. The legislature repeatedly passed rulings based on what would just get people to leave them alone and be happy for a bit, rather than thinking about the long-term consequences. So everything that's bad about what we have now, all the bad impulses of our Congress were hyperinflated by this system. There was so little trust because turnover was half of the Congress every year. So people would be owed money by the government and they would be promised it by one Congress 1 month, and then an almost entirely new government would deny them payment a few months later. This did not work at all. And so in 1790, they moved to a bicameral legislature with a governor and checks and balances, like pretty much everyone else ended up going towards. But I wanted to highlight this story even though it takes place over several years and not necessarily just this week in 1776, because it was like the first really early experiment with a state level government being formed, where they attempted the perfect popular democracy model, where they had super short term limits. Everything was based on, they hoped that it would make it so that the people's position was always being represented by their government, and that it couldn't be overruled by a governor vetoing some kind of legislation that was being passed, because Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin and the people who drafted that original government thought that was tyranny to have a governor that could veto the popular legislature. It turned out that was not the case. And we see these kinds of government frameworks being proposed by organizations like the DSA, although theirs is obviously more extreme to communism rather than just strict democracy. But I thought that this was great. Imagine, the volatility of your voter base, being led nowadays by the whims of, social media or media in general, and having every single year all of your legislators are being overturned with new ones, which means every single year whatever is popular is the new thing that your entire government is being run on. It's just insane.
Talk about your laboratories of democracy.
Exactly right.
What they didn't have a lot of experience with true democracy. And so they tried it, and they found out that the tyranny of the majority is as bad as, and in some ways worse than the tyranny of the average king. And the reason is exactly as you mentioned there, that you can go from one extreme idea to another within weeks or months. And there's no consistency, and there's no protection from it. The way our system works is by giving a lot of different institutions authority to veto what's going on. So the president can veto a bill. Then the Congress can veto what the president did by overriding his veto. And the Supreme Court can say, well, you can't enforce this particular statute because the Constitution doesn't allow it. And then the president can say, I'm not going to enforce that statute because the Constitution doesn't allow it. Or states could say, we're not going to follow that law because the Constitution doesn't allow it. And then the president can say, well, we're going to make you follow the law because we're going to take away a lot of money, or we're actually going to come marching in there as they did after the firing on Fort Sumter. So that is the way a good Republican system works, is that everybody gets veto power. And the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution are critical to that, where they put all power that is not explicitly granted in the Constitution to the federal government. They give all that power to the states and the people explicitly. And so what you had in Pennsylvania was a very good experiment that taught us a very useful lesson.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. I'm typing in my little notes here. It's like America was an experiment, especially in the early years before we were even a country. New England had its own distinct flavor of self-governance, very, very local. Southern states had their own flavor. Pennsylvania obviously had theirs. There were different communities in each of these states. Maryland's had a lot of Catholics. Pennsylvania had Quakers and Germans. But, it's interesting that, that Constitution, that first stab at the Constitution, nice try. It really wasn't, it was quite unworkable, obviously. And as we see, obviously, in the evolution of the United States, is that most states ended up basically copying the federal Constitution in structuring their own state governments. But, instead of that extreme diffusion of power, and as you described, kind of the chaos that it would generate and did generate, Madison and the other framers of the Constitution, they were geniuses. and they went for a balance of power instead of, a diffusion of power. There's a slight difference to that. So power is balanced between two legislatures, and then also among three co-equal branches of the Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court. And you think about, it was the age of the Enlightenment. These people were the greatest thinkers of the age, and they just happened to be residents of a colony instead of one of the old world countries. And so they had the opportunity to put some of these very bold, radical, revolutionary ideas of freedom and liberty and how to preserve it. That's something that I love this segment, Linnea. I love your dedication to this because it reminds us on a weekly basis of what the goals of the founding fathers were and the founding generation was. And it was to establish a society and a government that would not infringe on the liberty of the people. And that itself was just a radical idea. And so I love these lessons because I'd never really been cognizant of the fact that there are some tries that were pretty bad, but the intent was there, and you keep trying, and eventually they did create a government and a society in which the freedom and liberty of individual free people was paramount, and the government's role was to make sure that was protected and to never infringe. Although I will say there are two things about the Pennsylvania plan that I did like. 21 years old to vote. 21 years old in the 18th century is a lot older than 21 years old now, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And you also have to live there for a year. You had to be a taxpayer or the son of a taxpayer to vote. That's a pretty good idea because you have a stake. I've said this before. I got in trouble. Some lefty, I think, clipped me, and that I don't want. I want to disenfranchise everybody. No. I just said, if you have a stake in the game because you pay taxes, yeah, I think that's a pretty good. We should think about it as that's who gets to vote, not people who don't have a stake in the game. And also that all free men and their sons shall be trained and armed to defend the Commonwealth from the enemies of liberty. Yeah, I love it. Shall be trained and armed. You don't get a choice in it. We all need to be in this together to protect our liberty. I like it.
Yeah, I did
very much like that it held that you couldn't be in the legislature more than 4 out of any 7 years. I thought that was a really good way of doing things because with term limits, it is reasonable to say, look, some of these people, they do have experience in writing laws and so forth, and you don't want to lose that, but get them out of there for a while so that when they come back, they've had some experience in the real world. Of course, nowadays their experience is lobbying in the meantime.
So. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna cut us off here. Although I have to say I do like the wording. I think in the Pennsylvania version of the Second Amendment was probably better than what we ended up going with, just because it was more explicit. But the one we ended up going with has more artful quality. Although it has led to some weasel words. Not that they wouldn't find ways to weasel around it nowadays anyway, but whatever. Anyway, that's all the time we have today, you guys. Thank you, everyone, for your attention to these matters. We are live every week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all over the place. Jim, what have you for our audience today?
We have, as we do every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, the Climate Realism Show. It is going to be, I've already made up the notes. We already know what we're going to cover. It's going to be a fantastic show with our special guest. Well, Linnea will be there, of course, and our special guest, Lois Perry from Heartland, UK, Europe. See you there.
Absolutely. Sam?
Yes, I have an article at the Federalist on how the illegal immigration pushed up the prices of housing and really exacerbated the affordability crisis. Also, go to sdkarnick.substack.com.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. For audio listeners, please rate us well on whatever service you're using and leave a review. Thank you so much to all of our usual panelists. And real quick before we go, there was someone who left a comment for Chris. Oh yeah, DJ Bo over on Rumble said, who says Chris gets time off? How can the Heartland Institute uphold capitalism with commie BS like PTO days? All right. He says, just kidding. Have a great day off, Chris. We did miss Chris today. He would have had some great commentary on on all of our crazy voter fraud issues. And yeah, thank you guys very much. All right. So know, Chris, that, know that the audience missed you. We will see you again next week.